This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Phil is the author of The Life of Yogananda. We are found at spiritmatterstalk.com. We are a podcast, and we are now also a YouTube channel. So if you go to Spirit Matters Talk, and if you go to youtube.com and put in Spirit Matters Talk, we'll come up so you can not only listen to us, but you can see us. And if whether you're listening or watching, hit the subscribe button. It's free, and to subscribe to us. And we want to make sure everybody knows our archives are available to everyone for free. And we have around 300 interviews in there. We have a real wealth of information and lectures on contemporary spirituality. For those people that have contributed to help keep us on the air, we thank those folks. And if anybody would like to do that, go to spiritmatterstalk.com and that will be explained to you. This is the 75th anniversary of the publication of the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, a book that has influenced probably millions of people worldwide. It certainly had a big influence on me and many, many, many people I know, and got their spiritual juices flowing, got them interested in seeking a greater spirituality in their life. And we are very fortunate today to have two folks on who have been carrying on the teachings of Yogananda, Nayaswamis Jyotish and Nayaswamis Devi. They are spiritual directors of Ananda worldwide, which traces its lineage to Yogananda and his line of gurus, and has spiritual communities, centers, meditations centers worldwide. Thank you so very, very much for taking the time to come on with us today.
Oh, we're very happy to do so. It's certainly a privilege to do anything to celebrate Yogananda in this great book.
Yes, well, thank you for having us, and I look forward to an interesting discussion.
Great.
Okay, let's start. First, we should let listeners and viewers know this is the second time you've been guests on our podcast. The first time was in our pre-video days, but so if you want to hear more from Jyotish and Devi, please go to our archive and find the first interview with them, which will be a little different from what we're focusing on today. Tell us, to begin with, since we're celebrating the autobiography of a yogi, how each of you first came into contact with the book. What were the circumstances? What was the impact?
Well, maybe I'll start. I graduated college in 1966. I graduated from University of Minnesota. And like quite a number of other people, I went to San Francisco, which at that time seemed to be the magical place where things were happening, certainly that weren't happening in Minneapolis at the time. And so during that time, within, the first 4 or 5 months, I began getting interested in the New Age spiritual scene and had the book Autobiography of a Yogi recommended to me. And I read it thinking, or I picked it up thinking I was just reading one more in a long series of books. But honestly, for me, that was the catalyst that changed my life. Everything subsequent to that, I could have a pre-autobiography life and a post-autobiography life. And certainly for me, it was the catalyst for that.
Interestingly, my story is parallel to Jyotish. We, of course, didn't know each other then. I was graduating from the University of Wisconsin in 1969. I was in my last semester, didn't really know what to do. I was an anthropology major, and I was accepted into graduate schools, but I just felt like something was missing in my life. I took a class that last semester on the mystical poet Blake, William Blake, and someone I met in that class handed me Autobiography of a Yogi. And I started reading it. And to be perfectly honest, unlike Jyotish, here's where our stories diverge. I was so preoccupied with getting through finals and what am I going to do next that I started reading it, but I couldn't get into it so much. But then the same friend who handed me Autobiography handed me a little teeny brochure. This was 1969 about Ananda meditation retreat. And when I looked at that, I thought, that's my next step. This was the retreat founded by Swami Kriyananda, who was a direct disciple of Yogananda's and was our lifelong teacher for the next 50 plus years till his passing in 2013. But when I came to Ananda and met Swami, then I started reading Autobiography, and then I was ready. Then it revealed itself to me. And when I listened to Swami give discourses on Master's teachings, we call Yogananda Master, I just knew, I thought everything I learned in college really didn't have any lasting impact on me. I mean, it was all interesting and nice, but it wasn't that relevant to what I really wanted to know. And then when I heard Swami speak about these teachings and heard and read Autobiography, I thought, this is my next step. And after that, that was my life course.
You together travel the world, spreading the teaching of Yogananda and instructing students in the path of Kriya Yoga. Explain to our listeners and to those viewing us, what is Kriya Yoga?
Okay, well, Kriya is a technique of meditation, and Yogananda has a chapter dedicated to that in Autobiography where you'll find some more information. But essentially, Kriya in meditation is a technique, as I say, of meditation, where you revolve with your concentration and a special breathing technique. You revolve the energy up and down the inner spine or the astral spine. And in doing that, it magnetizes that inner spine, helps withdraw the life force into that inner world, one might say. And then at the end of the practice of a Kriya technique, which can take anywhere from, I'd say 5 minutes to 45 minutes, depending on how many you're doing. At the end of that, then you do one last Kriya and you bring the energy to the spiritual eye. And that withdrawal of life force allows you to meditate much more deeply than you would without that or a very similar technique.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I'll also add that the teachings of yoga bring us this perspective that all of our past karma or samskars we carry them with us as energy fields. Or the word in Sanskrit is vrittis, vortices of energy, locked up past actions, thoughts, and so forth. And these are all, they reside in this astral spine that Jyotish has been speaking of. And so with the revolving of this energy up and down the spine, Yogananda teaches that you magnetize the spine and begin to break up the very tightly bound karmic knots or vrittis, vortices, and release them. And so we've been doing Kriya for more than 50 years. We have many friends who have been doing it. And really what you see in people who practice Kriya over time is an increasing transparency, increasing freedom, increasing sense of joy. And it's, as we say, there's an interesting chapter if your viewers, listeners want to know more in Autobiography called The Science of Kriya Yoga.
I will get back to the autobiography, which is our main topic, but since we went here, our listeners are probably curious now how they can learn Kriya Yoga. There are methods available, Yogananda's methods available just on the internet. Some require an initiation and a commitment. Could you explain some of that?
Yes. First of all, there are a lot of teachings now available on the internet. We carry on a very active Kriya Yoga ministry here from Ananda. And so we've trained, tens of thousands of people in the science of Kriya Yoga. We also, because we're widely available, Ananda.org is widely available on the internet. We have a lot of people who connect with us. What we have found is that while you can find the technique online without any preparation, we have found very, very few people who continue a practice with a technique found that way. It's like they haven't earned anything. They haven't prepared the soil, and just to find some cheap seeds and scatter them doesn't really work very well. And so Yogananda, his lineage taught that Kriya should be given with an initiation, and that there is a transference of energy through the lineage that happens in that initiation. That, coupled with very extensive training and very extensive support for a person's practice afterwards, allows a much, much, much greater rate of success for people who get initiated.
But if any of your viewers, listeners are interested, if you go to Ananda, ANANDA.org, and look at online classes, we have a year-long training program and that you can take entirely online. There are people from all over the world enrolled. And then we even have the initiation online, also in person, but at Ananda Village and in all of our other communities. But there is a fee for it, but it's very modest. It's not, we're not doing it to make money. We're doing it to share it and to cover the costs of maintaining a website and staff and so forth. So if people are interested, you can take free how to meditate classes online from Ananda, and then begin the step-by-step training for the initiation. And I must say the testimonials we get from all over the world are very, very gratifying, very beautiful, how people's lives are changed through this training and practice.
Tell us a little bit about your community and who's there, what do you do there? Can people visit there? If somebody wanted to live there, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. One of the main goals of Yogananda, especially toward the end of his life, was to establish communities where people practicing these techniques could live together. Those of your viewers who are at all familiar with Yogananda know that he was at one time the most popular speaker in the United States. Mm-hmm. And he went for years on what he called his spiritual campaigns, went across the nation. I don't know how many. He must have visited 50 to 100 cities in this country and would give not only lectures, but series of classes. Mm-hmm. So he trained or taught certainly in more than 100,000 people during that time. But toward the latter part of his life, he established a center in Southern California in Los Angeles, and he wrote more, including wrote the Autobiography of a Yogi at that time. Our teacher, Swami Kriyananda, came during the last 3.5 years of his life. And he said that during that time, Yogananda rarely missed an opportunity to talk about living in community together. He really thought it was the right lifestyle. And so Swami Kriyananda, hearing that, also he had his own individual interest in it, picked up that banner, and he established the first community, Ananda Village, in 1967, and then subsequently established 6 more live-in communities where a group of anywhere from 50 to about 250 people live at Ananda village, can live together, practice together, support each other, and not just yoga, but in all kinds of other ways.
And
And
do
these,
people have other jobs outside of the community and
It's
and live
mixed.
there and maybe be an
Mixed.
accountant? Yeah.
Yeah, many,
yeah,
I'd say about 2/3 probably work in the community. We have a school, a beautiful school that's open to the public. We have a wonderful market. We have gardens. We have our outreach offices. We have our guest retreat. You asked about people visiting, and it's open. We're just starting to reopen post-pandemic. We closed down for the past year and a half, but it's up till the pandemic, it was open 365 days a year, and beautiful meditation temples, very gracious rooms, wonderful vegetarian meals, instruction in yoga postures and meditation. So guests are very welcome in that way.
And one more question, Phil, and that is, can people go there for the day or for
Yes,
a
of
weekend?
course. Yeah. you
and
can-
anytime, yeah.
Anytime. And just to add, in the month of April, we have beautiful gardens. And we play in one particular area of the community for just that 1 month, we plant tulips in the fall that bloom in April, 10,000 tulips,
Wow.
all different colors. And we had from all over California we didn't do it last year, but the year before, we had over 10,000 people
Wow.
visiting for the day, just coming to see the tulips. And it's really spectacular.
I'm going to try to make that sometime.
Oh, you
Yeah, oh,
should.
you have to.
People have said, world travelers who have come said they've never seen anything like it anywhere in the world. And then the setting are the Sierra Nevada mountains. So you're standing in this tulip garden and looking out at the Sierra Nevadas. It's quite magnificent.
Phil has been here at Ananda Village quite often. Have you ever been here for the tulip?
Never for the tulips. I've been to Amsterdam for their tulips.
People say, I've never been to Amsterdam, but people say this is better.
Better.
Because of
Tulip
the-
festival there is fabulous, but
Yeah, 'cause of
I'll
the-
have to make a point of coming in April next
Come
time.
together. You
And
two.
I will say it's a beautiful place. The village is beautiful. Accoutrements, everything is beautifully maintained. And I have to say that about Yogananda. I always would say that he had the best real estate karma of all the gurus. Because if you've come to Southern California and even in India, all the locations of the, different offshoots of his lineage, they're always beautiful and beautifully maintained. Even the ones that were established long after, he passed. To come back to autobiography, you mentioned your mentor, spiritual mentor, Swami Kriyananda. He discovered Yogananda because he read Autobiography of a Yogi when he was a young man in New York and got on a bus and went to LA to see if he could be a disciple, and was. And he's not the only one who did that. So getting back to the book, what was it in your case that made it such a springboard? What was it that, because the book is multifaceted. It's one of the interesting things about the book.
Right.
It's called an autobiography, but it's a lot more. In fact, there's so much left out. I felt compelled to write a biography of him.
Right.
So it's other things as well. And in my experience, different people are sparked by something, different aspects of the book. What was it for you?
Well, for me, I was really interested in consciousness. I was not religious at all. I had become an agnostic because the church that I grew up in just didn't answer the questions. I studied psychology, trying to find what what is consciousness? What is the scope of our minds? And nothing answered it. I was kind of at loose ends. And then I read Autobiography of a Yogi. And oh my God, I mean, it just took the top off of anything that I had conceptualized as the scope of human consciousness. Now, that alone would be interesting. But what really made it for me with that book is the obvious authenticity of it. I don't know of any other book that certainly is written as interestingly and as charmingly as the autobiography that is written by a real yogi. You have books about saints, about yogis, about experiences, but very rarely do you have somebody who you obviously know is telling the truth, talk about his experiences. And so for me, that authenticity and the scope of consciousness portrayed through saints, through experiences, through philosophy, all the multiple facets of that book, that's what really had the impact for me. I couldn't argue with it.
Which is unusual
Yeah,
for
which
Jyotish.
is, yeah.
A couple of questions.
Wait,
One is-
wait. I want to hear Davy's answer to
okay,
that
go.
question.
Okay, well, mine's fairly different. You know, I was talking with some friends this morning. Autobiography was published December 1946. So it'll have its 75th anniversary. And by the way, Phil, your book is such a gift to everyone who's read Autobiography, your biography of Master, because it does fill in the blanks. And I hope any of your listeners or viewers do take the time to read it, because it's a gift to any spiritual.
You hear that, listeners?
Hear that?
Yes,
And that was unpaid. So that was
Unsolicited.
Anyway, so I was born December 1946. So it was almost as though I've always felt Master wrote that book, and many of the founding members of Ananda were born at that time, few months on either end. And it was like that book came out and we just said, okay, if you're here, I'm coming. And we just think we came down and we incarnated. But for me, reading the book, I really felt that it was the closest friend I'd ever had. It was like someone who totally understood my problems, who had a way out, who was on my side, who was there to help me. And I just felt this is the best friend I'll ever find. So that was my connection with it.
You know, two questions. I just thought of this now. Autobiography of Yogi. What a great title. No wonder why so many people, including myself, were drawn to the book. And I was wondering where that came from. And also the influence of the book I was thinking about. I mean, we know what you have done and Kriya Yoga being taught worldwide. Well, over 50 years ago, I got involved with transcendental meditation. And back then, it was all that stuff was new to me. If I asked people that were involved in TM back then, well, what got you involved? How did you learn it? By far, the most it was autobiography. They read Autobiography of Yogi, and all of a sudden, we got to get this, whatever it is, wherever we can find it, in whatever form. And so I have to think, whatever spiritual group you go to, even Christian, other mainstream religions that have mystical traditions, autobiography. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who's a Trappist monk in a monastery in Atlanta, and Autobiography of a Yogi had a huge influence on him and his path in life. So it's very difficult to measure the extent to which that book, and who knows what the world would be like if that book had not come out. You know, I often think of that too. Anyway. So I guess it's all speculative, but it's you drop a rock in a pond and it's like this. Well, this was a big rock and in a big pond, and it sent some very nice waves out there that I think counteracted a lot of not so good stuff that was going on.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
there were a lot of people who read that book who figured they better drop their little pebble in the pond too.
right.
And so it not only affected the first generation of readers, but then from that affected millions more.
Yeah. But that's an interesting thought. What would our world be like today if that book hadn't been written?
Yes. Scary thought.
Yeah.
I have a specific question because this has come up so many times in my conversations with people. One of the standout features of the book, and there are many, is what people would call miracles and wonders, and the depictions of cities of what we think of as superpowers or powers of consciousness that yogis perform, because there's a lot of it in the book.
Right.
And people react to it in different ways. I'm curious what your experience is with all the people you know who've been influenced by the book, and not only devotees but lay people and people who are just come across it. You've probably encountered hundreds of such people. How do people react to that aspect of it in your experience?
Right. Well, first of all, it's a great attractant. Who doesn't like a good miracle? Let's face it. But the difference here is at least twofold. There are probably many facets to it. But Yogananda, almost all those miracles, he either witnessed himself or he knew directly the person who did witness it. So it was not at arm's length. It was the actual witness of it, and the verification that such things can happen. It starts out with his own father being doubtful about the advantage of having a guru, and then one of the line of the masters manifests in a wheat field on page 8 in the autobiography. So there's that firsthand or secondhand at most veracity to it. But I began looking at those miracles, and Yogananda uses them in a very interesting way if you look at them carefully. Almost all the miracles start out with someone who is either skeptical or someone coming from a lower state of consciousness. And then the miracle happens, and it's not like, oh, wow. It's like, oh, wow, I'd better do something about it. And so almost all of them are presented as kind of the flash, but then the story behind it is the change of consciousness that happens when you see the result of somebody who is able to raise their consciousness to these high states. So the first part is, oh, it's really interesting and flashy. The second part is Yogananda showing that these miracles are not really miracles. They just are what happens to someone who lives in a high state of consciousness.
And, you were mentioning the title of Autobiography. The original title was Yogi Christ of Modern India. Then he later changed it to Autobiography of a Yogi. But he wrote that book primarily for the West. He came to America in 1920, and just on the eve of his departure from India, his guru Sri Yukteswar said, forget you were born a Hindu, but don't become an American. Take the best of both worlds and be yourself a child of God. And when I read more and more stories from Phil's book and elsewhere of what he did in America, he did that magnificently. He became not an American, but he was a blending. He was an amalgamation of the best of both. And so I think part of the reason for all the miracles, in fact, on the frontispiece of the book, he has the quote, "Lest ye see signs and wonders, ye shall not believe." And so that's why he put them all in there. You Westerners, you're skeptical. You don't have the same natural integration of God and devotion into your life. I'll give you some miracles that will cause you to maybe rethink a materialistic way of life. So, but again, one time, Swami Kriyananda told us that once someone said to Master, your detractors are saying you're losing your powers. And Yoganandaji said, I don't know that I ever had any powers. So he did not emphasize that in his teachings or in his own life. He had them. He raised people from the dead. He did many miracles, but that wasn't what his path was. His path was not to be attached to anything in the world, but to uplift your consciousness to the point where you realize your oneness with God.
We're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the publication of Autobiography of a Yogi, and the book, if you haven't read it, read it. If you've read it, read it again, because it'll be a totally different book to you, I think. And,
Exactly.
and it's also available as an audio book. I think Ben Kingsley, somebody with a great voice,
And Kingsley.
reads the book, and obviously somebody very moved by the book. And also read the life of Yogananda, the story of the yogi who became the first modern guru by my dear friend Phil and co-host Phil Goldberg. And fill yourself up with some good stuff. And I think that's it's very inspiring. And we look at the world, we look at our lives. There's always the glass can either be half full or half empty. But I think after you read the book, you'll be inspired that the world is very capable of aspiring to a much greater height, and that everyone can participate in that by developing themselves. And I think that very much that was Yogananda's message.
I would like also to add that Swami Kriyananda has recorded an audio version of it.
Oh, yeah.
And that has the advantage of somebody who lived with him. And so that comes through in some of the stories and intonations.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
some of the passages, Swamiji is just weeping as he reads it. Ben Kingsley's version is beautiful. He has a beautiful trained voice, but not a disciple.
Speaking of different
I
versions,
wasn't familiar with that. That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
since we mentioned different versions, the version most of our listeners will be familiar with is the same one that I read in 1970.
How old is that book, Phil?
I've had this with me for 52 years. I borrowed it and never returned it.
Oh, I don't know what the karma is for that, Phil.
Well, I know what it is. You write a
Depends on who you borrowed it
biography of
from.
Yogananda. That's the karmic debt I had. But Ananda publishes the version with a blue cover that is explained. It is the version as originally published, with none of the added edits and revisions that were made subsequent to 1946. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and the reason that we did that is, 98%. Yeah, there it is. And by the way, we're going to release a 75th anniversary edition of it coming up.
We'll have all this posted up on
Yeah.
spiritmatterstalk.com. So
Great.
But explain what the motivation was for doing that. And
Yeah, I would say 98% of the two different versions are identical.
Yeah.
But gradually over the years, SRF began to make more editorial changes. And from Ananda's point of view and Swami Kriyananda's point of view, who had lived with Yogananda, it became more and more institutionalized over time. For instance, just as an example, in the original Autobiography of a Yogi, it says that Kriya Yoga should be learned from a qualified Kriya practitioner. And that got changed to an authorized Kriya practitioner, meaning you have to be authorized by the organization in order to do that. And that's just one of, we made about 500 edits, mostly removing, I mean,
We didn't make the
yeah, we
edits.
didn't make it. We just changed it back to the
We
original.
worked with the
We-
original.
Yeah, we noticed that there were about 500 of these edits. Also, very significantly from our standpoint, they had removed the last part of the book where Yogananda had a discussion about the importance of spiritual communities. He called them World Brotherhood colonies, and how he was dedicated to seeing that happen. And that got if not entirely removed, at least tamped down. But the vast majority of the two books is virtually identical.
Yeah.
Phil, any final comments, or
Oh, there's so much more to be said.
we'll have to do a third interview?
We'll have,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
well, you know, in my experience, people come to the autobiography for different reasons, under different circumstances. Something appeals to them. I know people who think all the miracles and wonders are bull and fictional stuff, but they like other things in the book.
That's true.
And, you know, and for some people, the spiritual, message doesn't quite resonate, but they can't wait to go to India. You know, there's so much that draws people to it, and it is a multifaceted book. And we have to say, it's called an autobiography, but there's so much about other people in the book, all the yogis and great people from history like Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, and Americans, that he knew, like Luther Burbank. So, it's a multifaceted book. It's 500 pages or so. So people should, even people who read it back when they were hippies, you may want to revisit it now that you're, grandpa and grandma, and take a fresh look at it, and and draw from it what you can at this stage of life.
Thank you.
Well, I'll have to say that I've read and reread it many times, and it's like a gold mine. There is ore down there that you never even knew existed. So
I always think every time I reread it, I thought, this must be a different version. This chapter wasn't in it last time, but it's the same book, So it speaks to you on different levels according to your own development. But I do want to just add, this morning we did another interview about autobiography, and one of the things that I think is very important as we're kind of coming to the end of our interview here, autobiography is a message of hope for the future. It was written right at the end of World War II, after the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the world at that time was holding its breath. It didn't know, are we going to blow ourselves out of existence? We had just been through a horrific experience. And Yogananda talks about Kriya Yoga, the way to uplift your consciousness. He talks about new ways of living. He talks about, well, everything in the autobiography, but he said, he talks about world harmony and world unity, and it gives us a vision of the future. And really, I think Autobiography of a Yogi is a handbook for our times, for how people can find a way out of the disharmony and divisiveness and insanity that we see prevalent in the world around us, greed and violence and so forth. So I think this book is a gift to humanity. Whether you ever practice meditation and yoga or not, it gives you hope for the future.
Well put, beautifully put. Thank you.
Fine way to end, except for one thing, because I, as co-host of this podcast, I have the prerogative of promoting something. So I'm going to promote in January. I'm going to be teaching a 10-week course, 10 online, on the Autobiography of a Yogi, where we'll go through the whole book and read it in depth, like, 50 pages or so per lesson, for Hindu University of America. So people can go to hua.edu and
We'll have it posted up.
Good.
I'm looking forward to it because I'll get more out of it by leading the course, but we want to invite people to do that. We don't usually promote things of our own, but we're doing it today. And thank you, Nayaswamis.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
It's always a joy to see you.
Yeah,
And
for us too.
Maybe we'll get to see you in person before too long.
yes, I
Absolutely.
hope you get to LA or I get up to the village. It'll be a great pleasure, and enjoy all the celebrations of the 75th anniversary. I know you have some things coming up in that regard, and so people can go to, is it Ananda?
Ananda.org, and you
We'll have
can
it
find
posted.
it there.
Yeah, so good.
Good luck with your course, Phil. It sounds marvelous.
Okay, be
Great.
well. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. Phil, those folks were absolutely a delight. Obviously, radiating what they're talking about. They looked fantastic, felt good, like so many of our guests that are very committed to their paths. And it was also the 75th anniversary of the writing of Yoga, Autobiography of a Yogi is it's quite significant that the book has influenced so many and continues to influence many people. It stayed relevant.
Do you think we'll be doing the podcast for the 100th anniversary?
But one can only hope. Well, let me just say this. If there are people out there willing and able to contribute a little bit to keep us on the air a bit
And
longer.
keep us alive.
Yeah, for us, it's keep us alive. It's week to week with the show, that is. And by the way, reminder, please subscribe. Whether you're listening or watching, hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything. And we'd appreciate it if you did that. But we've had some really fantastic guests on, always learning a lot. And, show people your book, Phil, because he didn't ask me to do this, but it's a great book. It's something, you enjoyed Autobiography of a Yogi. This should be read as well. And it's available, and there you go. And Phil, tell us, we'll talk about them, but say a few words about this course you're giving in January. This is 2021, so it'll be January 2022.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of, I've been invited to do a lot of things because of the 75th anniversary. People find it worthy of talking about the book and celebrating its impact. So Hindu University of America, hua.edu, they asked me to do a course in honor of the autobiography, but it'll essentially be a study circle to go through the book and read it chapter by chapter, and each week discuss a section of the book and its deeper meanings, which when you read it by yourself, you miss a lot. So reading it and discussing it with a group of people, and I can say this, but, I know a lot about Yogananda's life and the circumstances of writing the book and the publication of the book and all that I'll bring into it, that will add to, the enrichment of reading it. So thank you.
I'm curious, is there an Ananda Society in India? Is it a separate organization run by Indians?
We've, I take tours to India, and a couple of times when we start the program in the tour in Delhi, we visited their center in Delhi. And last time when we did the south of India, we visited their center in Chennai. So they're active in India as well. And in Italy, they have a place in Assisi,
Right.
where
Yeah, I remember that.
Yogananda was very fond of St. Francis of Assisi.
If anybody's hasn't been there and they have an opportunity, I've been to Assisi, and when you go into there's the town and the monastery, then and the church, and then up the hill is the monastery. When you go in there, it's a very powerful, meditative, inward. You're drawn inward feeling there. It's a really special place. I wanted to also ask you, Phil, and I know a little bit about this. You know more, and I'd like you to tell listeners. They mentioned their Swami, their teacher, Kriyananda, who was a disciple of Yogananda, spent a lot of time with him. And I didn't know this, but he joined Yogananda toward the end of his days on Earth.
Yeah, I think it was
tell us a little bit about Kriyananda. Yeah,
it was, I think, 1949.
Right.
That, well, when I interviewed Kriyananda before he passed, when I was researching American Veda, and I met him a couple of times, and I read his story as well. But he was a young man in New York, and a seeker, and read Autobiography of a Yogi only 3 years or so after, maybe 2 or 3 years after it was published, and said, this is what I want, and had the nerve to get on a bus and go to Los Angeles in hopes of meeting Yogananda and becoming a student, and he did. And somebody else who ended up starting his own offshoot of the lineage, Roy Eugene Davis,
Right.
who we had on years ago.
Similar story.
He passed. He also, he was in the Midwest, and he too
took a bus,
the Autobiography, and went, to LA and became a disciple. So it's, there are people like that who end up being total devotees. Mm-hmm. And in Kriyananda's case, a member of the inner circle around Yogananda for the last few years of his life, and then a leader in SRF until there was a split, and he either left or was kicked out, depending on who you hear, and ended up starting his own branch of the lineage, but always honoring the same lineage, Yogananda and his parampara, the lineage of gurus. But he, he wanted to create these, what Yogananda called brotherhood colonies, these, communities, spiritual communities of fellow devotees. And, it's, you got to say, starting a spiritual community is not easy. Right. There's been many attempts that, died on the vine, didn't last very long, and.
Right, I remember at toward the end of your Autobiography, Yogi, one thing that captured me was his talking about that, about how it's very difficult when you're in the world of working and consumption and everything else to really remind yourself you're on a spiritual path. And I think his idea was let's have both, and let's have community where we can support each other in that. And it's interesting because, he probably, I don't know if he got it from Yogananda, but at the end of Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, one of the things he emphasizes is spiritual community. And so that you can, because it's, I think, obviously more difficult to maintain one's spirituality or commitment to developing spirituality when one's off on one's own. There's actually a line, I mentioned it in the interview. I was thinking of Somerset Maugham's book, The Razor's Edge. And he said, and I think one of the messages he was putting across in the book, the main character says, yes, it's easy to be not a yogi wasn't the word, but a seeker on a mountaintop in the Himalayas. But it's when you come into the world and you're driving a cab and you're in New York like that to maintain that. So some people can do it, but it's much easier when you have a
Well, when
community, and that's the purpose of these communities.
think about it, every spiritual tradition emphasizes being together.
Right.
You know, we build churches and synagogues and mosques, and we bring people together in community. And there's words for it. You know, the Sanskrit word is sangha. And, you know, in Buddhism, the sangha is terribly important. The community of fellow, you know, brother and sister devotees is terribly important. Group consciousness is important, and the mutual support is important. And, you know, I would guess many of our listeners are spiritually independent and maybe would like to have spiritual community, but, you know, being part of a spiritual community is also very challenging. You know, human beings are tough to live with. So I've always admired
Ample evidence of that. Yeah.
I've always admired the ones that succeed and maintain their continuity over the time. So Ananda Village is now what, 55 years old or something, and it's still flourishing, and they have urban communities here and there. They have,
and it's not run by a monastic order. Obviously, there are a couple by its householders. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, especially back in the day, it was meant to be a householder community, and, you know, they built schools and raised children and all that. And some of the communities, I visited a couple of their communities, Seattle, Palo Alto. I think, you know, there's a few others that are less cohesive and organized, but still communal. And then most of them, you know, are people that have jobs and, you know, live in the world, but they live together, and they have shared activities and events and programs and meditation and everything else. So it's a challenge, but if you can succeed at that, it's quite beautiful.
Right. Well, once again, the 75th anniversary is coming up December 2021. This is November 2021, and
well,
so
by the time people see this, it will already
2022 or later. Is Autobiography of Yogi. And Phil, your book again, you want to hold up one more time?
Oh, you're very kind, Dennis. Thank you
not?
very much.
And
And really, I did this in large part because, you know, I'd written about Yogananda and American Veda, and I realized how much of his life he left out of his own autobiography. So
great. Well, till next time.
Till next time,
hit
sir.
that subscribe button before you leave.
Yes.
Please.
Hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends.
Over and out.